Sally YouTube, how's it going? I hope that this video finds you doing well. Obviously Not Even French is usually a channel that's all about the French culture, Kiwi culture, you know, as a New Zealander who lived in France for 6 years, French husband, back in New Zealand, but you know, going back to France hopefully very soon, and you know, sharing life between the two countries. That's what I tend to talk about. But sometimes I like to drop in some more personal videos and give you a little bit of an insight as to some of the major topics going on in my mind. And I wanted to talk today about a topic that I just don't see enough content on, which is around the decision on whether or not to have children. I feel like this is a decision that I've been navigating, a lot of my friends have been navigating, and it's a conversation that we're starting to have and see more often as people more and more are thinking about the state of the world. They've got climate anxiety. We're in a world of fewer and fewer resources. We're in a world where we have many more conversations about purpose and meaning and acknowledgement that there's not just one status quo definition of success. There's not just one status quo default that we all have to do and tick the boxes. And obviously I want to acknowledge my privilege in having this conversation. As far as I know, I am fertile, so please don't take this as a painful or offensive topic. If you're someone who really wants or wanted to have children and it wasn't possible for you, I'm talking about for the people where it is possible, but it's still coming up as a decision and it's just not being spoken about enough. I think how complex this decision is these days and how difficult it is to navigate. And I'm going to talk you through a couple of reasons why I think that is. And the point of this video isn't to draw any kind of conclusion, I would say, but it's just to allow people, I think, anyone watching this to feel seen if you have been navigating these topics yourself, or if you've had to land on a decision on this topic in your lifetime, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people are just like, oh, cool, what's the next milestone now that, you know, we've been married for a few years? Oh, let's have a baby, you know? It is difficult if you're more of an overthinker kind of character like I am, and also if you have a little bit of a complex life, I would say. If I had settled down with someone from the same region and we lived close to a family and we had a simple but really happy life and everything was very happy and healthy at home and really easy, and we both had predictable jobs, maybe the decision would be super simple. Maybe it would just be obvious that that would be a great source of fulfillment for you. I think when you have more complex lives, as in I'm married to a guy from the other side of the world, and we're living in a time of what feels like scarcity in the world as well, not enough resources, too many people, that kind of thing. It does start to make you think, not to mention, I don't have a standard job, right? I have built my business, Badass Careers, which is super cool, and I do have a lot of flexibility and freedom and that kind of thing. But at the same time, my gosh, it's a lot of work, and I really feel like myself, I have birthed my own baby over the past few years, and it definitely has toddler tantrums sometimes as well. It's not all smooth sailing, so it's just an interesting, I think, discussion to have, especially if you have a life that's less than straightforward. And let me know if you can relate as well. If ever since you've settled down into a long-term relationship, or ever since you get married, you start to get the questions, which is, when are you going to have kids? When are you guys going to have a baby? That kind of stuff. Sometimes it's just like, you know, cute teasing, like you're meeting your friend's kid and they're like, when are you guys gonna have one? And that kind of thing. I think people are realizing a lot more often now not to ask that question, because people could be trying, could be really suffering, might not be able to, might not want to. I think people are starting to realize that that's not really an okay question to ask, but most people have really wholesome intentions and they're just asking because they would love to see you have a baby. I have to say, parents don't do the best job of selling it. Parents, they seem really stressed or just like really stuck and bound to a routine, right? The kids' routine, especially in those early years, is so key. And it's like their whole world revolves around this little baby, as cute as they are. And a lot of them are exhausted, you know, and they're making jokes like, oh, you'll never sleep again, ha ha ha, or like, get ready to never have sex, ha ha ha. When are you gonna have a baby? And you're like, whoa, that doesn't sound very nice. They've got this slogan, right? Hard but worth it. It's really hard, but it's worth it. And it does make you think, as someone without children, you have to think, is it worth it? Or do they have to tell themselves that now that they're too far in, that there's no going back and they need to make themselves feel better? sometimes some parents are just like sort of really venting about it and talking about how hard it is and how complicated it is, and at all different levels, right? Sometimes in the newborn phase it's the lack of sleep, in the teenage stage it's something else, in the preteen stage it's something else. At every phase there's a whole new set of challenges, and sometimes parents, which is fine, are venting about it, just talking about it, because I think, you know, these honest conversations weren't happening before. But you know, they kind of go on about how difficult it can be, and then they're sort of like, when are you having a baby? And it's sort of like, come join the misery, you know. So sometimes, you know, you're a little bit like, whoa. But then of course you see these gorgeous little kids running around, making them crack up laughing. I mean, you do see your friends change quite a lot, and not to say they lose their identity, but their identity does change, and they're telling you these stories and their eyes are lit up and they're just so into it, and they're like, you know, telling a story about a funny thing their kid says or something, and they're just cracking up and they're just so in love, and it's very, very sweet. So there's obviously just this very instinctual connection that seems to happen that just makes you adore this little thing. They make you laugh, they make you cry. It's just a feeling you can't explain. And so I very much acknowledge that this is not a rational decision. And I think the decision to have children has to be an emotionally charged one, because if it were rational, if you were weighing up the pros and cons, I think objectively, especially in someone, as I said, in a more complex situation like mine, there are quite a lot of cons, right? You've got the apparent lack of sleep, and I love my sleep. I love my Sunday morning sleep-ins. They cost money. If we're traveling between New Zealand and France every year, that's going to become a very, very expensive life. You do think about the sacrifices you'll make in terms of how you like to spend your time, and, you know, having time for yourself and having quiet time for you, and being able to, you know, I go to dance class 5 times a week. Would I be able to do that kind of thing? And you do think, you know, as someone without children, when you have a very, very full life, how the frick would I ever fit it all in? And then when they arrive, you've got a couple of options, right? You can stay home with them, which looks really rewarding, but it's also looks really, really hard. Like, oh my gosh, stay-at-home mums, that should be a paid profession. You know, there's a lot of groundwork. There's a lot of cleaning and preparation and meals and doctor's visits and appointments and learning and child development. Like, it's a very rewarding but intense undertaking. Or, you know, daycare, but that's really expensive. So you go back to work and basically daycare is taking half, 3/4 of your paycheck. It does make you wonder. I think the other thing that's going through a lot of people's mind at the moment is, will kids born today resent us for having them? I know that's an awful question to ask, but it is something that I do ask as an overthinker, as someone who poses these kinds of big questions and mulls on them. But what kind of world will we be in 100 years from now? What if we start to run out of oil in a big way? We start to run out of water in a big way. We start to run out of food and crops in a big way because of the effect of climate change. Will people be able to travel? Will air travel be something that they look back on thinking, how could you? And of course, it's a choice to make in terms of where you spend your time and energy, and there will be projects and adventures and perhaps travel or just other fulfilling kinds of projects that you might want to do in life that you can't do anymore because you've decided to have kids. The other thing to take into consideration, which is why this isn't a rational decision, is research shows that people without kids are actually happier. And it's probably because they have a lot less stress and a lot less things to argue about as well, potentially. And also, when you're in a bicultural relationship like I am, you do have to think about the big picture and ask serious questions. Like, you never plan to break up. Like, I want to be with Nils until my dying day. But if we did eventually uncouple or break up or get divorced, whatever you want to call it, like, how would that work logistically, right? Like, how sad would that be, having kids and sending them to dad's for holidays only in summer or whatever that looks like? So that's also a really important and big consideration to take into account. So if you've only watched until this point, you're probably thinking, okay, she definitely doesn't want children. But let me go into the pros and the positives, because that's where there's almost a sense of kind of magic, right? That's where people are telling you that there's a kind of love that you've never experienced before. It's just so deep, and it's just a completely different kind of love that you will have never experienced. And I think it looks incredibly fulfilling, raising a good person, instilling them with the right values, raising the kind of person that's going to make an impact on society, going to make a really big contribution, a kind person that makes other people laugh and makes you laugh. I see parents with their little kids laughing all the time. There's so many funny moments and stories and very sweet moments as well. Like when your baby's cuddled up on you falling asleep, I just imagine there's no other greater sort of responsibility than having this little person that you've made and is all yours and you need to look after. There's also also, of course, the sort of genetic side of things, which makes you feel like you continue on in a way, or even not genetic. That could happen with foster children as well, but your ideals, your values, a part of you, your memory does continue on in that way because someone who has lived with you continues living after you're gone. Of course, that's only temporary because one day they won't be there either, but there is quite a romantic notion around that, isn't there? That your memories of holidays together and family memories and that kind of stuff, it actually gets to carry on for many years to come in someone else's mind, you know, your children and your grandchildren, and you are remembered in that way. There's also just a very natural and instinctual pull. I mean, you can't look at a little baby who's just come out of a bathtub wrapped in a little towel without your ovaries screaming. It's just not possible. Like, that's just the cutest sight in the world, this cute little baby wrapped up in a wee towel. Like, there's just something that you look at these little babies and you just think, oh my gosh, what a delight. And it's obviously something that's happening at a level that we can't even explain. It's neurological, it's instinctual, it's in your gut, it's in your heart. There is something when you just look at little babies and you just think, oh my gosh, this is so precious. And you do look at them and their tiny little, you know, feet and their tiny little ears and their tiny little nose, and you do think this is kind of the meaning of life. Even if you don't necessarily believe that at a rational level, and you know that meaning and fulfillment can be found in so many ways, there's something almost like animalistic that takes over and makes you think these incredibly intense things, I think, when you're around little babies. I think there's many different ways to have very fulfilling projects in life. You can find so much fulfillment in the work that you do, and the volunteering that you do, and the relationships that you build, and the music you make. It can be so many different things, but I would say that raising children does look like a really fulfilling and really interesting project. As a psychology major, I can just imagine myself geeking out on how to make them fulfilled and make them more confident and help them thrive and just be their best little selves, right? I'm really into child development and that kind of thing, and I think I would just eat all of that kind of stuff up. And then just at a really basic level, I mean, do I love the idea of taking a little dose of Niels and a little dose of me and having these gorgeous little kids that speak English and French, and they're, you know, they're bicultural, and they have this really unique experience in the world. And like, yeah, of course, when you love someone, you love the idea of having like a little piece of them and a little piece of you combining to see the combination you can make, basically. But again, it's like, when it comes down to these reasons, they are, I mean, excuse my wording, but it is true, they are quite selfish. It is quite a, like, you know, it's an innate desire. It's something that would be lovely. It's something that would be fulfilling for you. I think it's when you zoom out to that big picture, practical perspective, when you are talking about those things like the climate change anxiety and the resource wars that are bound to come and all of that kind of stuff, you know, when you're thinking about what would their lives be like when they're 100, or what might their kids' lives be like, it does sort of make you think. In terms of educated generation that has children en masse, it looks like the trend is that it's just going to go down, and it already is going down significantly, but it looks like, you know, will the next generation even decide to have kids? And so it makes you think, oh, should one last generation for the road, or like, you know, and so there is a sort of like selfishness to it as well, which is really difficult for an overthinker like me to grapple with. At the end of the day, as I think you can realize, like, I don't have the answers. No one has the answers. It's a decision that depends on the kind of life that you want to have and the types of experiences that you would like to have in this lifetime. Sometimes I get really dark and I just think about the fact that we're on a little rock floating around the sun, and one day that sun is going to explode and all of this would have just turned to fairy dust. You know, sometimes I think, stop overthinking, Rosie. Sometimes I'm like, oh, one day this will all disappear anyway. Either way, both decisions, to have kids or to not have kids, they both have pros and cons. Either way, it's a decision that sticks with you for a lifetime. So it does feel really big. But do I think that you can find happiness and fulfillment either way? Absolutely. I think you can have a beautiful life either way. It's just a different genre of beautiful, and it's just made up of different ingredients. I would love to hear from you if you've ever gone through this kind of thought process, or if you've made a conscious decision to have kids, to not have kids. What was that like for you? How did that show up? And what were the factors that came into play? I'd be really fascinated. I love discussing about these kind of philosophical topics. You can find joy, you can find happiness. Either way, there's going to be pain from having kids, kids, from not having kids. It's up to you ultimately, but I would still love to hear your individual reasons. I'd find that really, really fascinating. And if you like these kinds of videos where we talk about something a little bit different, something that's maybe on my mind, or a topic worth debating, or something that's going on in my life, I definitely love to know about it, because these videos do tend to get less views, but I don't really care about that. It's more around, is it enjoyable content and is something that you enjoy watching? So let me know. And otherwise, back to the regular scheduled programming next week. I will catch you here for all Francophile content, New Zealand, Kiwi culture content as well on the Not Even French YouTube channel, and we will talk soon. À bientôt!